All right. So today I am joined by Amy Pelky. She is the founder of Pause to Remember. She is also a CRNA, an amazing mom. And so I'm not going to introduce her. I'm going to have her introduce herself so we can talk a little bit about her professional background and get to know a little bit more about Amy. So welcome to the podcast, Amy.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to join you.
Hey, Mama. You deserve a life free of overwhelm and burnout. Welcome to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast. I'm your host, life and mindset coach, Shiro Bergbauer. I'm also a wife, mom, and CRNA. This is the podcast for high-achieving mamas in medicine like you and I. Together, we'll learn how to navigate the ups and downs of working motherhood. If you're looking to thrive in your relationships and overcome overwhelm in your motherhood, marriage, and medicine, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast.
Oh gosh, I'll give you the highlights. I'm originally from South Portland, Maine. I grew up really close to Portland Headlight, for those of you who love headlights, and finished nursing school, moved to Charleston, South Carolina, right out of nursing school. That was back in the 90s when you couldn't get a critical care job very easily.
Yes.
Right out of school. And so I was able to get one down in Charleston, South Carolina, and loved it. I was there for about 3 years and then went and became a travel nurse for a couple of years before I decided to go back to anesthesia school. Landed in Pittsburgh for the first time ever to interview for anesthesia school. And I am still in this area, although my husband and I have left and come back kind of thing. But I'm currently now in Washington, Pennsylvania, which is about a half hour south of Pittsburgh. It's my husband's hometown. And he too is a nurse anesthetist as well. We met in anesthesia school and started dating at the end of school. And I guess the rest is history.
Wait, were you guys classmates?
We were, but we were just friends during school. Yeah, we didn't start dating until we graduated. So
Awesome.
it worked out.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about your
Yeah.
family.
We have one son, he's 11, and then our daughter was stillborn in 2016, and that's kind of how Pause to Remember came to be. It was just very unexpected. My pregnancy was going even better than how I had felt with our son. And I went to my routine halfway through the pregnancy ultrasound and got some really devastating news. And of course, that was the day my husband couldn't get out of the OR to come to the ultrasound appointment with me. And I was like, it's fine. I'll have them print out pictures and I'll bring them up to you when I'm all done. And as things were going along, I could tell things were not right. And I just turned my head away and stopped watching. And the radiologist came and basically told me that our daughter had a life-limiting problem and he wasn't completely sure what was going on with her, but she had a severe cystic hygroma that was wrapping around her neck. She had pretty significant ascites, and he wasn't sure if there was something going on with her heart. My midwife was wonderful. He had called my midwife before he came to talk to me just to kind of give her a heads up. And they handled it all very professionally and with great deal of kindness and empathy. And, no sooner did I leave the radiologist's office and go up and, tell my husband I had one of the other CRNAs get him out of the OR and told him what was going on, breaking down in tears in the hallway. And somehow pulled it all together, got to the car. My midwife called me and she said, this is not good news. We don't know what's going on, but I got an appointment for you with maternal fetal medicine tomorrow. So go see them. And they were equally as wonderful. And they felt like there was something genetically going on with her. They suspected Turner syndrome based on what they saw in the ultrasound. And so long story short, lots of genetic tests were run and whatnot, and everything came back negative, and they had no idea what to tell us. We had the opportunity to have a conversation about whether to terminate the pregnancy or to continue on. And we both decided to carry and see what happened. Had made the decision that if she made it to term, we would offer palliative care to her and just keep her comfortable. And so we were comfortable with that. A couple weeks later, I just didn't feel any movement. And so got in touch with OB and, heard those words, there's no heartbeat.
Oh, wow. I am so sorry.
Oh, thank you. It's I think
That's a lot.
any mom, as soon as you see that pregnancy test turn positive, you begin to write the narrative of that baby's life. And you don't even know if it's a boy or girl,
Yeah.
but you have these thoughts, oh, I'm going to dress them up at Halloween, or we're going to take a trip to Disney, whatever, whatever that narrative
Mm-hmm.
is, we're going to be
Mm-hmm.
complete at a
Yeah.
family of four, and so you have that life that you've already started to create in your mind. And then when you have these brakes put on all those thoughts and dreams, it's, a huge loss. But then you don't realize until sometime later, at least this was my situation, was that your baby's life still lives on, and the narrative sometimes just changes
Mm.
in a way that you didn't anticipate. Mindfulness became a big part of my grieving journey, and I felt like it gave me
Yeah.
a lot of space to get some perspective on everything that was going on, figure out some sort of meaning. I can remember on maternity leave reading the Viktor Frankl book, Man's Search for Meaning, because I was like, there has got to be some meaning in this. Like, I can't be going through
Yeah.
all this. My family can't be going through all this for nothing. There's got to be a way to make some meaning out of Anna's life. And I decided to go to yoga teacher training about 4 months after we lost Anna. And I did it simply to deepen my own practice, because on my meditation
Yeah.
cushion or on my yoga mat, those were the only two places I felt any peace or solace. And so I was like, well, there's something
Mm.
here. I'm going to go and deepen my own practice with no intention of ever teaching yoga. I met this.
We make plans and God laughs,
Yeah,
right?
right. Exactly.
Yep.
And in my yoga teacher
Yeah.
training, I met this other bereaved mom who had a similar journey where mindfulness became a huge part of her healing journey. And she had had multiple losses. And so Pause to Remember kind of came to be after we finished our training. And it was like an evening workshop for a couple of hours. We did some meditation, yoga, and sharing in brick and mortar yoga studios. And the participants that did come gave us positive feedback, but we didn't have a lot of participants because we had no marketing plan. We had a little
Mm.
website, an occasional post on social
Yeah.
media, and then the yoga studios just posting it on their website. And so we didn't get the response that we had hoped because we had no marketing plan. And then one thing led to
Yeah.
another. And
People, you can have a thing, but people need to know it exists.
yes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
fast forward, part of my grieving was also throwing myself into work. Like, I took on more
Mm.
responsibilities, and I even did some independent contracting work and fell a little burnout with all the extra that I was taking on. And then COVID hit. And about the time COVID hit, I was in a really good place. I was, teaching 2 to 4 classes of yoga a week, and I was working a couple days a week as a CRNA and being a mom to our son. And COVID hit, and it rocked everybody's world in healthcare, I think. And so
Yeah.
I was home for COVID, part of the week, part of the time in the OR. I didn't really lose much time in the OR, mainly because I do a lot of off shifts. So the weekend work didn't really change that much. There were still emergencies to go in for, that sort of thing. But I decided to move Pause to Remember to an online format and create an online offering. And I can tell you that learning how to build a website and all that stuff in the middle of a pandemic when you're stressed and trying to homeschool your kid for the first time is not the best time to do it.
No, I don't think there is ever a best time, because it's something that again, both of us are CRNAs in now venturing into the entrepreneur's landscape. And it's very hard to realize that there are things that you're not good at when you've been so good at one thing and everybody looks up to you to have the answers in the room. And you're like, what is Java? What is a script? What is a code? What is all of this foreign language? Right. So, I mean, I'm sure the pandemic didn't help, but I can absolutely relate. And in fact, I still remember how we connected, right? You sent me this message after I had done a whole podcast about my entrepreneurship journey. And I knew the podcast would land with a small fraction of my audience, right? I was like, but I want to share the difficulty in stepping into something new as an entrepreneur. And unfortunately, it's not like in anesthesia. If the blood pressure is high, you give this drug, it comes down. Like in entrepreneurship, you put in a lot of work and then you get zero result. And then you have to get up and dust yourself off and try again. And so it was a whole different animal. And so it's been interesting. And we had this conversation where we both are aware how lonely it is to be in this space because we're kind of new at it. Other people are obviously really good at it. And we're like, okay, if I'm good at anesthesia, I'm pretty sure I can figure this out, but it's still not easy.
You couldn't have said it any better. Yes. Yes to all of that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to go back just a little bit. First of all, when you talked about Anna, and one of the things when you connected with me and I went to your website, I think it was on your email. I remember you posted a Viktor Frankl quote that's one of my favorite quotes, and it's about the space between stimulus and response. Mm-hmm. For me, that has been such a guiding principle as a coach, and I help my clients understand that, is that it's not that we get better at handling stimulus, it's that we get better at widening that space. And the more time we create in that space between the stimulus and the way we respond is how we grow. And so that was so touching for me to be like, oh my God, she's like totally my person. She totally gets it. So that's the first thing. The second thing I wanted to go back a little further back was when you talked about, going to your ultrasound appointment as a CRNA, your husband obviously being at work. One of the things I've realized, these things are so normal for us as nurse anesthetists, like the schedule and the work hours, and we work all sorts of insane times. One of my biggest frustrations when I became a mom was that the information that was out there was so geared, even for the basic working mom, it was geared for the 9 to 5 mom. It wasn't geared for the mom that has to be in the OR at 6 a.m., whose partner is in the OR at 6 a.m., wants to go to her OB appointment, and your partner doesn't have a 1 hour lunch break. You don't have a 1 hour lunch break. So can you talk a little bit about just that, that concept of navigating issues in your pregnancy with a partner who's also in medicine and realizing that the support is a lot different?
Because we're nurses before we go to anesthesia school, we have a little bit of a understanding that it's a 365 day a year job, 24 hours a day. But there is definitely a switch going from working 312s as an ICU nurse mm-hmm. to working in the OR and covering call and whatnot. We kind of just got trained in our programs to make it work. And I see this all the time in the work environment where, especially, I started noticing this in particular about 2018, spring of 2018 in my mind is when I really started to notice some of the staffing issues and just making it work, making whatever you had work.
Yeah.
So much of our professional lives can bleed into our personal and family lives that when it comes to getting your own care and being on the other side of the healthcare system as a consumer, we forget that it's okay to say, I'm a person too, and I'm human, and I have the same exact needs as any other mom. Mm-hmm. That was very much the case when I went to that ultrasound appointment. I totally get it, honey. Like, I understand sometimes the OR schedule doesn't go as planned. I'll get some pictures and I'll bring them up to you when I'm done, and you just make it work because we are programmed to make it work. And I would like to think mm-hmm. that the pandemic gave us a pause and an opportunity to create some space to start saying, we are human too.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's something that I feel like has come up as a topic on the podcast as well, is that, and if I only gave one takeaway from this whole conversation is it's okay to give yourself permission to exercise self-care.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And it's not just bubble baths and candlelight.
No.
It
no, it's not just bubble baths.
I don't feel good today, right? I'm not going to come in. This job isn't serving me anymore. I'm going to look for something different. I've shared on this podcast my realization that I get to decide what my work environment looks like, even though the work environment I was used to looked a specific way, like just making the decision, you know what, I'm going to go do 1099 work because it allows me to be more fully present for my family. And I had to detach my ego from like being part of this big mission of a cancer hospital and being a W-2 employee and the security of that. And just realizing like, when my life is over, I'll just be another statistic of that hospital. but my family will always remember that. And so when I've shared on the podcast, I have to be very careful how I word it, but I always want to make sure that people understand it's choices that we make, right? We get to decide, do I want to work in the hospital environment? Do I want to go part-time? Whatever decision you make, it's a safe decision for you. But I think the idea that we're stuck in a certain work environment, like we have got to end that, because our lives are so much more than the work that we do. Our lives are so much more than the value we bring to a facility. And I think the biggest burnout contributor for me when I look back at my career was like the idea that I couldn't do anything else, right? Like, suck it up, use what you have available for you. You have a great job, you have benefits. And then just waking up to the reality, but wait, my kid's not going to be 3 forever. How will I have spent that time? And making a decision for myself going, I'm going to go all in on my business, which means I got to step away from this idea of what the perfect anesthesia job looks like. And I can serve people in that capacity. And so that was a big wake up call for me as far as like burnout. When I hear people talking about how much they hate their job, I'm like, I've been there. I know exactly what you're saying.
Yes. And I am very empathetic as well, having gone through it. And I'll even share kind of my journey and some big transitions I've made in the last year and a half. I remember being lead CRNA in March of 2018. And the first time I sat down that day, I got in there at 6 o'clock in the morning. The first time I had sat down was 2:30 in the afternoon, and I was finally eating some lunch. And I just thought, this is too much. And this isn't a rare occurrence. This is happening more and more and more. And I paused, and my husband was a lead CRNA at the same job at the time. And I remember texting him as I was sitting there. I was like, I think I just need to like reevaluate this situation. And in the process of reevaluating, I actually interviewed for another job at a smaller community hospital, which my husband ended up taking instead of me. And I stayed in the same job, but I started making some shifts. And so I ended up doing some independent contracting work for a ketamine clinic. Had like a really eye-opening experience doing that. Did that for about a year. Kept working in the hospital just because it was working for my family needs. And then as the pandemic was starting to wind down, I was just like, our 1 year plan to homeschool our son, which was just supposed to be for the first year of the pandemic, has now turned into 2. And now year 2 is going so well. I think that this is going to be a permanent thing. And I cannot continue to go at this pace. I cannot continue to homeschool him and work and trying to be a mother and try to I can't do it. And so I went per diem in January of 2022 at a hospital. I love the people, but it was just getting to be too much. And the staffing challenges were just, for me, physically, emotionally, spiritually, it was just no longer the right fit at that time. So I went per diem, and within 48 hours of turning in my notice of that I was going from staff to per diem, I got a call offering a little per diem job at a eye surgery center 5 minutes from our house. So instead of traveling 45 minutes to the trauma center, I was going to travel 5 minutes. And it was, they had needs on Thursdays when my husband was off. That's my day to work. And I work Thursdays or weekends. Like that's when I have time to work, because that's when he's off.
Yeah.
And they were like, yes, we need help on Thursdays. And so I started working there, and it was like such a nice break for me to like step back and take a deep breath. And it gave me more time to focus on my son and his educational needs and just be in the season of motherhood. And I had that thought last year, I only have 8 more summers with my kid, and he's going off to college. And now I'm saying, I only got 7 more summers with my kid. And guess what? I can work a whole lot more when he goes off to college, and it'll be fine.
Absolutely. And you know what's interesting? When you said going from trauma center to eye cases, I like, in my mind, I clutched my pearls, because I'm like, oh, I can totally understand that. You're going from this like big grown up anesthesia job, and people are like, you're gonna do eyes? Right? Like, it's almost like we, because we're programmed to be like, you want the toughest and the best and the this, and then it's like, oh, and I remember like thinking to myself, like, I'm gonna go from doing like big cancer cases to doing like ortho and like pain cases and what is wrong with me? Like, why am I giving this up? But I had to remind myself I wasn't giving anything up. I could still totally go back and do those things. It's just the season in my life that I'm in right now.
Mm-hmm.
This is the best decision for my family, and it's the best decision for my business.
Yes. Yes.
And that's a tough pill to swallow, right? Because you then realize how your ego is tied into your job description.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. And I do feel like in the process, I found a new identity. And I never thought, if you told me I was going to be like a homeschooling mother, I would have laughed at you 3 years ago. That was not my plan. But now I'm just so grateful for this opportunity. And yes, our income has definitely taken a significant hit. Me working, one day a week is definitely a big change in our income. And guess what? It's been fine.
You make it work. Yeah.
Yes.
You make it work.
Yeah. Yep. So I drive an older car, and, we don't have a huge house, I'm okay with that, and maybe we take one less vacation a year or something, it's just, we've been able to make it work. So for anybody out there who is feeling like, can I make this work? Or what would happen if I would lose my retirement? Or those are details and they're all figure outable, you can figure it out. You go talk to your financial planner. That's what I did. I went and talked to my financial planner. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to have, this contribution now to a 401B or 403B or whatever it was. It was that plus I had 2 retirement accounts, and now I'm not going to get funding here. And how do I adjust? And you figure it out and you make it work.
Figure it out. And, the reality for me is like, I gave up a job that came with a pension, right? And what I told my husband, I was like, listen, when I did the math in the pension, the way the accrual worked is that I would have to retire at 62. When I joined the system, I could have retired at my age plus years of service would be 80. I could have retired at 55, but then they changed the minimum retirement age to 62. So the way I looked at it was I could literally be away from the system for 7 years, come back if I wanted to and get my full pension. And by that time, my daughter would be 12 and, I could make different decisions. And so I think when we even look at like job benefits, I just asked myself, like, what if I stayed in this job that wasn't serving my family until retirement and I missed out on so many moments of my daughter's life and I missed out on so many things? Would it be worth that retirement? And having grown up in a third world country and lived with very little, I was okay with that. Like, I was like, I'm okay giving that up to give my best shot at the one job that I know that I'm really good at, which is being a mother. And so I'm going to do that. And it took a lot of like conversation with my husband because he's more like the planner and he's the German. And I was like, listen, we'll make it work eventually. We have to make it work eventually. And so that fear it's normal. I think it's like, oh, but we've been programmed to like safety. This is safe. But I had to ask myself, if everything was taken away from me, what would be this pension worth to me? And it wasn't.
Yep.
It really wasn't. Yeah. All right, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about pause to remember, because I think that the work that you're doing is so needed in our community. I know it started from your own personal, pain and struggle, but tell me what prompted you to say, okay, I'm going to build community. I'm going to create this community for women who are struggling like me or who have struggled like me, especially in healthcare.
At the beginning of 2022, I worked with a coach and I was like, this isn't clicking. I feel like I need to just focus on healthcare providers. And she said, then what's stopping you? And I was like, I don't know. And she's like, well, why don't you give it a go? I was like, okay. And Shauna had stopped, working with Pause to Remember before the pandemic. And it was just me. And she was like, do whatever you want. I just shifted and just made everything about creating a safe community for any licensed female healthcare provider who's grieving after loss. Because even though I had a wonderful therapist and great family and friends and a very supportive department, what I really wanted was to talk to other providers to be like, what happened when you went to the OR and you broke down because you got triggered? Or what happened when you saw one of the providers that took care of you in the hallway? Those are the kind of things I wanted to hear, and I couldn't find it anywhere.
Yeah.
And that really stuck with me. And so I went back and looked again. And again, I couldn't find anything just dedicated for healthcare providers. It's really hard to be in one of these general Facebook groups and say, I'm an anesthesia and I had to go put an epidural in a laboring mother and it triggered me, with all these other people who could potentially be your patients, So I wanted to create this space so that we as healthcare providers could say, this is terrible. And I just plaster on my, professional face, turn the corners of my lips upside down and say, everything's okay. Go in and do what I need to do at work, but I'm really not okay. And to create a space where you could say that. And then
realizing that we couldn't be told, you couldn't be like, well, I'll never do OB again, or I'll never do pediatrics again. Like, it's your career, right?
Yeah.
Like it's something you're faced with every day.
Yes. Yes. I think a lot of us deliver in the very hospitals where we work. And so just walking back into the hospital can be a trigger. And so when I started talking to others, it's funny, you start talking about your own loss and then people are like, well, I had a miscarriage, or I had a stillbirth, and you didn't even know that they had walked that journey until you say something. And then, so I started listening and I'm hearing residents are having a miscarriage and going back the next day because they're worried about the other residents on their team are going to be mad at them for not showing up. And I'm hearing, other, anesthesia providers saying, I just don't want to do OB. I just want to do any case but OB. But, I'm struggling to, put words around that and, put boundaries that I need to shift my focus in the OR or what have you. And
the people who go, like you have the loss and you go on maternity leave, and there are people even in our profession who are like, why do you need a maternity leave? You don't have a baby to take care of. It's hard enough when you go back and you've delivered a child and people are like, how was your time off? And you're like, I was not on vacation, but now you're coming back, right? And there's that, like, people have biases about that. Like, oh, why do you get a maternity leave? I actually had a woman reach out to me maybe 2 years ago, and she was telling me how she had had a loss and her boss was just being so difficult about the time off that she needed. And she was a nurse, I believe. And I was just thinking, like, it's not like we can switch off this switch and go, okay, I won't run into a pregnant person or a child. Like, our job involves taking care of humans. We might get triggered by humans that are pregnant around us, right? Especially when, and I feel like sometimes in anesthesia, when one person on the team is pregnant, half the team is pregnant. And so that is like so understated. And I think the bias against women in healthcare to just like tough it out, like handle it, is so sad, because it's like we're expected to like really take care of other people, but then God forbid you want to take care of yourself.
Yeah. And I had a physician last fall tell me that after listening to the podcast, she decided to take her full maternity leave. And I was like, good. And I just reiterated, I'm like, you do OB, so you know that your pelvic floor still needs to heal, and you know that your milk is coming in, and you've got to dry that up. And the milk coming in is like insult to injury. It's just so devastating, and it takes some time to get it to dry up. And then you need to so no, you're not up with a crying baby, but you're up with insomnia because your grief is keeping you up. And so you're not sleeping, just like you wouldn't be sleeping with a newborn. So just trying to normalize some of those conversations and try to like help other providers know that there are others who are trying to pave the way for them. So if they find themselves in that position, that they realize that there's other providers advocating for themselves and hoping that that helps to advocate for other providers going through the same thing.
Absolutely.
And just trying to find some resources that, coming along different people, just like you think, oh, I don't know if this will land with my audience, but there might be, a few people out there that this supports. And just even recently, Katie Cooper, who's a CRNA, she does fertility anesthesia. I had her come on the podcast because it's really interesting when you start looking at the rates of infertility and loss amongst healthcare providers, it's actually higher than the general population. And the physicians are
Interesting.
really,
Why do you think that is?
well, I can tell you some numbers. The physicians
Yeah.
are really starting to look at this. There was a group out of Boston, a group of surgeons out of Brigham and Women's that published a study in JAMA Surgery in 2021. And they surveyed both male and female surgeons, but there were 692 female surgeons that responded to the survey. Their pregnancy loss rate was 42%.
Oh my God.
Yes, 42%.
Wow.
And then they in the survey, they looked at major pregnancy complications amongst that nearly 700 surgeons, and their pregnancy complications was twice the rate of the general population at 48%.
Wow.
And that's things like
Wow.
preeclampsia, placenta abruption, and that sort of thing. And some of the things they talked about was the fact that if you stand longer than 6 hours, if you are working long days, if you were working more than, I think it was 55.5 hours a week, if you were taking 6 or more call shifts a month, all of these are contributing factors. And when you start looking at overnight call, working night shift or taking call from home and having to come in the middle of the night, it disrupts melatonin levels. And they're starting to figure out that melatonin impacts the ability to get pregnant, stay pregnant, and the health of the placenta. But there's no statistics for APPs, because I did a Grand Rounds presentation a couple weeks ago and was pulling all this, and I couldn't find any data for APPs.
Yeah.
And the nursing staff, has some data too, but not as specific as what some of the physicians in the last
And not as robust.
Yeah. And there's still a lot of room for research here in this area. There was another group that surveyed, this was an ER physician at Duke, and it was a little less than 300 physicians, and 51% had had a miscarriage.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah. Infertility rates used to be 1 in 8. Now it's down to about 1 in 6 in the general population. And they're finding in physicians it's 1 in 4. And also, in addition to that, a lot of it is delaying the start of having a family. So you're in your 30s before you even attempt to have your first child, never mind your second or third. And so, your fertility rates start to decline in your early 30s, your advanced maternal age by your time you're 35. Well, this is when we're having babies.
Yeah. I mean, I only have one, but I had my first one at 35. So yeah, my chart definitely said advanced maternal age. Yeah.
Me too. I was 36 when I delivered our son and 41 when we lost Anna.
Yeah.
And it turns out that Anna died due to a 2-vessel cord.
Oh, wow.
It caused intrauterine growth restriction. Well, a 2-vessel cord is more common in a mom who's advanced maternal age.
Maternal age. Yeah. And if you think about it, when we're even talking about even APPs, we are not having children in our early 20s, right? Even in the general population, but especially for us, we're pursuing careers. We are getting married later, right? So those numbers, I think, will only increase.
Oh, I think so.
And so the need for support is like so critical.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's like, I think, Amy and you and I can kind of like agree on the fact that like you see these resources out there and it makes you kind of like angry that, again, we've been so focused on taking care of patients as a population of healthcare providers that we haven't done the work to create these resources for ourselves, right? So like, even if you think about like in OB, I'm sure OBs have all these resources for working moms and how to support them, but they haven't tailored that work around supporting healthcare moms. And I still remember one of the reasons I was like so passionate about starting my platform was going back to work, and I was exclusively pumping, and I would go on these pumping forums and I'm like, well, it must be nice to have a 1-hour lunch, right, where you could pump for 30 minutes and eat your lunch for 30 minutes. I was like 40 minutes, and I was fortunate, like I would work with some very supportive people who would like take your time, but still you feel bad, like you're taking away from another person's lunch break. And here I am like pumping and eating my lunch and trying to FaceTime my daughter, and just realizing, wow, it'd be nice if I worked a corporate career and could just like go in my office and like, pump, and like realizing like, oh, that's not available for me. Or the people who are like, drink lots of water. And I'm like, oh, you must not work in an operating room where you might not get to pee for like 4 or 5 hours. So creating these resources for our people to feel cared for providers to feel that somebody cares for them and is tailoring the resources to their needs, not just what the general population would need or want.
Yes.
And it's not easy for us, if you think about it, even if you take the time that you need for maternity leave, even as a CRNA, you're well aware that your team is struggling, right? You're well aware that there's staffing issues. Nothing you can do about it, but it doesn't take that guilt away, right? It doesn't take the guilt of I'm out of work and my colleagues are struggling and there's nothing I can do. I have to take care of myself. But it's like you're pulled in two directions, like take care of myself or take care of my team. And so having available information like, listen, I get it. I hear you, right? Me too. That is so important for moms.
Yes. And I think it's interesting. So much of this is how you frame it. I remember recently talking to a CRNA who had a loss, and she was just struggling with OB. She's like, I just can't continue to do this. And the only way to get off OB was to go per diem. And I said, well, can you financially go per diem? And she said, absolutely. It'll be fine for me. She said, but I care so much about my team. They're wonderful. And I don't want to leave them high and dry. And I said, so what if you did this? What if you said to them, I will get you through, I'm giving you more than a 90-day notice. I will get you through the summer vacation season. And then come September 1st, I want to go to per diem status. So you give them lots of time to find a replacement. You make sure that they get their self-care by having their summer vacation, and you give them lots of warning, and then you can take care of you, because she wanted to start fertility treatments and whatnot again. And you talked about earlier about how everything has to be timed out. And like, it's so hard to like, you got to do your injections, and you've got to go in for your lab tests, and you've got to go in for your ultrasounds and your egg retrievals. And, it's all precisely timed out. And she wanted to go per diem. And I said, it gives you a light at the end of the tunnel, and it gives you that professionalism of saying to your colleagues, I care about you. I'm giving you lots of notice, and I'm going to make sure you can get through your summer vacations. And then I said, and guess what? You did not create the staffing shortage. Like, you didn't create that. So that is not on you. And I feel like when I said that, like, it gave her permission to be like, oh yeah, you're right. Like,
to just breathe. Yeah.
This isn't,
because we're kind of made to feel that we are responsible for the team. I think it's just conditioning, right? So like when somebody gives you that permission slip to be like, by the way, it's not your responsibility. It's like a breath of fresh air, right?
Yeah.
Making those decisions. And if you think about like my last job, we could only take 2 weeks off in the summer, right? And I remember just having this thought that it must be nice to not have, for people in my coworkers who didn't have families that lived outside of the country, right? Because for me, my in-laws live in Austria. It takes, by the time plus or minus travel time, 4 days are gone. So now you're telling me I only have 10 days for my daughter to go see her grandparents, right? So it's like there's so many other nuances in our job that we're made to feel like, oh, you're carrying the weight of the team on your back. And then how dare you be so selfish to want to go through fertility and to want to get early out for these appointments. I actually remember at some point in my pregnancy, I needed to leave early for something. And I felt so awful. Like, how dare I want to leave early? But it was a critical maternal fetal medicine appointment. And the doctor could only see me at that time. And I was like, I wish I worked an office job where I'd be like, peace out, I'll be back in 2 hours.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. So, I hope to create this community of support so that, if it's turning on a podcast to listen to another provider talk about their journey through infertility or, multiple miscarriages. There's one physical therapist who came on. She had 7 miscarriages in a row. And she talked about what it was like trying to schedule. She's like, I would go to the doctor for like the 7 a.m. appointment. And then I would go and do see all my physical therapy patients. And then I would go to a doctor appointment at like 4:30 in the afternoon, which was like the last appointment, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
She would her whole schedule for work was trying to be fit in around all these fertility appointments.
Yeah. And no wonder, like the stress levels, right? The stress levels and the impact of your high cortisol level and just like
Yes.
that constant. You're also like, if you think about it, just that anxiety, your norepinephrine is also high all the time because you're like always in fight or flight
Mm-hmm. Yep.
and you're trying to grow human.
Yes. Yep. So just trying to normalize those conversations, let other people know that they're not alone, give them permission to say, this is what I need. I need to take a couple weeks off after my miscarriage because I've just gone through 4 years of infertility treatments. And this is not just a loss of this baby, it's a loss of the last 4 years and all the efforts and hopes and dreams I've had. And then a space to come and speak face to face on the second Monday of every month. Whitney Jablonski, another CRNA, and I hop on Zoom and we just create space and we can talk about anything. So if you feel like you're a provider and you're grieving and you're struggling to preserve your career, your relationships, and your well-being, well, then come on. We'll talk about it and we'll be real.
We'll include
honest.
all those links in the show notes.
Yes.
We'll include the links in the show notes.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And the Facebook group, you can link to that. And then taking some of this mindfulness training, I did my 200-hour training, and then I have a couple additional certifications in both restorative yoga and yoga for cancer, which I learned some things that kind of lend themselves well to grief, put together a 4-week mindfulness course. And I actually just talked to the AANA representative about getting CEU approval for this last week.
Awesome.
I've got it in the computer, but now I've got to make a bunch of changes so it'll get approved. So if you are a CRNA and you want to do this 4-week mindfulness course with me, it's called a Mindful Prescription. I'm going to be launching that on September 10th, and it's going to be very flexible options so that you can get support at different times during the week based on flexible schedules. I'm going to just have office hours to help support you through the course, create a space for community with others going through the course. And then, with the CEU, it'll allow you to use your continuing education money to get some grief support. So
awesome. And then are you going to have a wait list for it? Like, are you going to have a waiting list for it so they can kind of sign up to get emails about it?
I will give you a wait list link and you can pop that in there as well. Yep, absolutely. Perfect. And then a full description of the whole course. I'll give you a link for that and then people can check it out. And I'll also give you a link. I have a little calendar each week where if somebody wants to talk to me one-on-one, it's free. You can just put yourself on my calendar and I will pop on to Zoom at that time and talk to you because sometimes
that is so needed.
Yeah.
So needed.
I think sometimes people need one-on-one. They're not comfortable speaking in a group setting and I'm happy just to be available. So I'll give you my calendar link in case anybody wants to just hop on and talk to me one-on-one in a more private setting.
That's awesome. So actually, I'm glad you kind of leaned towards talking about mindfulness. So I actually just recorded a podcast episode on like mindfulness and awareness as a parent. And I wonder sometimes, like when we working moms hear mindfulness, is it that we're like, oh, it's sitting on a yoga mat for 30 minutes. I can't do that. How can we make mindfulness more mainstream in our profession? What do you think is getting in the way of it becoming like a thing?
Well, I think sometimes, like you said, I look at mindfulness as formal mindfulness practice and informal. So the formal practice would be meditation and yoga, but informal mindfulness practice could be something as simple as mindfully washing your hands. So we wash our hands all the time, but how often do we actually stop and think about, I'm turning on the faucet and the handle feels cool, and noticing the feeling of the water touching your hands to moisten them, and then the sound of the soap dispenser, putting that dollop of foam in your hand, and then what it feels like as you wash your hands. And that 20 seconds, you could do that multiple times a day. That practice of just mindfully washing your hands can anchor you to the present moment. And that's what mindfulness is about being aware in the present moment without judgment. So as you're washing your hands, you can be like, wow, that water's really cold, or wow, my hands really need some lotion. And it just anchors you to what's going on right here, right now. Because a lot of times, especially with grief, you get stuck in what's happened in the past and you have that sadness or the feelings of depression. And the anxiety creeps up when you're constantly thinking about what's going to happen in the future. But man, when you come right back to the moment, it's a pretty safe space.
Yeah.
And
because it's like you realize you can carry both emotions at the same time.
Yes.
Yeah.
So whether
Yeah.
you're washing your hands,
It's interesting because I like sharing like the tactile meditation only because I feel like it's more relatable. It's like just noticing where you are in space
Mhm.
and how little we kind of pay attention to the here and now.
Yes.
And like those micro moments
Mhm.
of connection with yourself are so critical.
Yes. Yeah. So whether you're washing the dishes or mindfully taking a bath or brushing your teeth, you can take any activity that you're doing and pay attention to it. And I like to use my five senses in the moment. So maybe you're out walking the dog. And so you have a visual awareness. Look for something that you didn't notice before. Maybe the leaves are, getting a little bit larger because it's springtime, as they grow and bloom. And
Yeah.
then the scent, maybe somebody's cutting grass and you can smell the grass. And then the feeling of the pavement underneath your feet and the sound of, a bird tweeting as you walk past the tree. You can use your sense to create this awareness and cultivate that mindfulness in the moment, no matter what you're doing. So that would
Mhm.
be another thing that I would recommend.
So it's interesting that you mentioned that. You mentioned that because one of the things that I've started to realize is how much we can learn about mindfulness from kids.
Oh,
So when I'm walking with my daughter, it's like the world stops moving if she sees like a little snail on the ground. And like it's like again, that pause and she is like, these intricate little details of like a snail on the ground and a ladybird on the ground and nothing exists in that moment except that snail that she's looking
mhm.
at. And I have challenged myself like when she stops because sometimes it's like, okay, let's keep going, but I like also stop and I'm like I want to be in that childlike awe, like just be in awe of the existence of a little bit, like a little snail, right? Those micro connections. I remember when I read Deb Dana's book, Anchored, it was such like a realization of how much we take for granted because we're not here in the now, right? And what is available to us if we just took a minute or two. Like sometimes it's like I just put my hand on my chest and I'm like, oh, I feel overwhelmed. Like this is happening now. It's okay. And I remember when I started shifting towards being more mindful and present, it felt a little awkward because many of us in healthcare, I think we live in our heads a lot and we forget the mind body connection. And once you start forming that relationship with your mind and your body to be here in the here now, it's like, oh, wait, my body and my brain actually communicate.
Yeah. And if you think about
Yeah.
yoga, it means to yoke or to join. So mind,
Mm,
body, head, heart. I think we frequently have a disconnect. And, yoga is just, even if it's just 5 minutes of moving on your mat and using the feeling of your hands on the mat and the feeling of your body moving and using that awareness, it can be really powerful.
yeah. So it's actually been interesting to me. Once I discovered the work of Stephen Porges, which is polyvagal theory, I was like, I think this is like the key to helping CRNAs and health like people in our field. Like we understand the autonomic nervous system so well, right? In terms of like the drugs that we give and the patients that we take care of. And I just like think to myself, I'm like, I think if we're gonna like make mindfulness and like being anchored like mainstream in our profession, I think we have to start with like being like, hey, by the way, that thing you're very, very good at, which is the autonomic nervous system, it actually works for you.
Yes.
Like if you understand, like, when you're in sympathetic, activation, or when you're in ventral vagal like safety, or you're in dorsal vagal disconnect, like if you understand, like, the science behind what happens in your autonomic nervous system, you can be like, oh, my heart rate's up because I'm activated.
Mhm.
Right. Or I'm feeling sad and like I'm releasing, little dopamine and I'm looking for dopamine by running away from my problems. I just wonder, like, if we kind of found a segue to be like, hey, anesthesia people, come over here and use autonomic nervous system to your advantage. I think people would be open to it more
Yeah, I think so
because
too.
then it doesn't feel woo woo.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, these are terms I
Yeah.
understand.
Or start wearing an aura ring and doing some of these practices and look at, yeah.
Yep.
Mine's on the charger right
Yep.
now.
That's me.
Yeah. But look at your heart rate
Yeah.
variability and
Yeah.
how these practices impact that and your resting heart rate and whatnot. It gives you we are all data driven professionals, I think.
Data.
And the aura
Yes.
ring really gives you some
Yes.
valuable data. When I am doing my meditation and my yoga consistently, you can see it reflect in the numbers of the Aura Ring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The most interesting one for me is like, you know, when you're stressed, but you don't know you're stressed yet.
Yeah.
And my Aura Ring will be like, your resting heart rate has been a little
Yeah.
high. And it's like, then it almost like knows that the stress is coming, right? Or when it tells me your HRV has been like fluctuating, is there something going on? And I can tune into that. And I think having that data has been so good for me, just to be like, oh, I get good sleep, but like, this is why I'm not rested when I wake up. I'm not getting deep sleep. Why am I not getting deep sleep? Am I exercising? Am I meditating? Am I taking better care of myself? Am I like relaxing before I go to sleep? And so that data for us as healthcare providers is so important. And I even wonder, when we're talking about like the impact of stress on fertility and the rates of miscarriage, if we can carry that data with us to be like, okay, this is like prime season for me to handle my stress before I try to have a baby. And I remember I used to work with this Russian anesthesiologist. She used to be an OBGYN in Russia. And she literally told me when I got married, she was like, if you want to like get pregnant, you have to like first manage your stress. And she was like, otherwise, if you want to be stressed all the time, you might want to start saving for IVF. And, you know, it's like very much like that. Like she was very like stern about it. But I thought about that after the fact. And I was like, she's right. Like if I don't manage my stress, I have to like start preparing for the possibility of being 35 and having fertility problems, right? And so, yeah, you're right. The data, I think it's what our people maybe will be like, look, here's all the data. Come over here.
Yeah. And there's starting to be research. There was a group in Copenhagen, Denmark, that did a 7-week randomized controlled study for bereaved mothers, looking at doing about 10 minutes of meditation a day for 7 weeks versus the control group that just had the standard bereavement care. And their stress levels were significantly less at the end of 7 weeks compared to the control group. And so there is really data coming out now showing that this is truly an avenue to explore if you are going through a stressor like grief.
Yeah. And instead of, you know, our employers giving us pizza parties, we could have like mindful minutes, right? Like, oh, you get 10 extra minutes on Wednesday grand rounds to have mindful time, right? And connecting with yourself. Because I also, one of my biggest criticism of like the whole burnout with COVID was just this strange messaging around, well, at least you haven't had COVID, or at least you still have a job. And it's like, yeah, but I'm still stressed. Like it doesn't take that away. Right. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about, because you mentioned it briefly, but I wanted to kind of dive into it a little bit. Tell me more about the ketamine clinic work, because, you know, that's also become like a big thing, especially with peripartum mental health and, you know, for postpartum struggles. Tell me a little bit about that.
I saw some patients have tremendous benefits after the series of 6 infusions over the course of 2 to 3 weeks. You know, I remember one in particular. She was a mom in her late 40s, if I remember correctly. And, you know, after that series of 6 infusions, she's like, I feel like I got my life back. And she started working full time. She started exercising. She lost weight. It really turned her life around. Did it happen for everybody? No, but there was definitely some real significant benefits. So if you're somebody, you know, who doesn't want to be on antidepressants for long term, or antidepressants, you know, oral antidepressants didn't work for you and you are really struggling, I think it's definitely something worth trying, giving it a go. You know, it's not covered by insurance, so it is pricey.
Isn't that unfortunate though? That is so unfortunate.
Yeah, it really bothers me. I'm like, the things that we cover under insurance that have much less benefit than ketamine infusions. But yeah, so, you know, if you are somebody who's struggling, I would definitely say try it. You know, it is pretty uncomfortable for many people, when you dissociate and kind of have that outer body experience. It can be scary, but that's when the magic happens. So just know that if you're having that experience, that's when the ketamine is working. So, you know, I would encourage anybody who has, you know, felt like they've exhausted all possibilities. Now, I will say that I think making some significant lifestyle changes is really important too. Like, get rid of the junk food, get your sleep hygiene under control, like do all the things, start exercising, start meditating, go to therapy. I wouldn't use ketamine as just your only way to treat resistant depression, treatment-resistant depression or anxiety or OCD, I would do everything else first and like really do it. Don't just kind of do it. If you are eating a high inflammatory diet of lots of processed foods, I would really clean that up, because I feel like the people who made the lifestyle changes had the biggest benefit. Now, maybe that was just, luck of the draw. That's what I saw. But it would be interesting to see people, I didn't do it long-term. I was only part of it for about a year, but I do think the people who were going to therapy and making lifestyle changes had the biggest benefits to it.
Okay. So before we wrap up, how can people find you?
So pausetoremember.org or amypelky.com.
Okay.
I've got two websites, are the easiest ways to find me. Or you can find me on Instagram at pausetoremember or Amy_Pelky. And I'll give you all that stuff for the show notes as well.
Yeah. And all those links will be on the show notes. Yes.
Perfect.
Thank you so, so much. First of all, for connecting with me. I truly, like, when I got your message and I was like, I have no idea who this person is. But, sometimes you create a podcast and you're like, who is this even for? And it was just like, I'm sure you're familiar with this. Like when you do one thing and like one person, it touches one person, you're like, yeah, that's it. My work is done. So when I did the entrepreneurial journey and you gave me such great feedback, I was like, okay, it helped one person. It's amazing. So I truly, truly appreciate that. And I'm so grateful to connect in this space. I know that so many women's lives will be impacted by your work. And so I'm very, very, very proud of you for taking the big step to make those decisions to go out in the world and launch a business and launch yourself and put yourself out there, because I know it's not easy. And maybe the people who have done this longer than us are like, what do you mean it's not easy? But it's like when we come out from that OR and we're the expert, and now it's like, how do you post on Instagram and what's a hashtag? And you realize that, you're not the only one. It's great. And these women's lives and their partners will be truly, truly impacted by your work. So thank you for showing up and giving value and being an example of what's possible too, for mothers who have lost their children, that, you can have the resources available to navigate the grief and that you're not alone.
Well, thank you for those kind words and the space to come and share with your audience. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And we'll have you back on here once you launch again, so we can remind people like, hey, this is what you're going to get. So we'll definitely have you back. It was so great connecting with you, Amy. And I'm honored to be in this space supporting moms just like you. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
You're welcome, Shiro. Thank you.
I'm Shiro Bergbauer, and you've been listening to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast. New episodes are out every Monday. These episodes are created by me, Shiro Bergbauer, and produced by Cassidy Mitchell. If you enjoyed this show or found it helpful, please rate it and review us on Apple Podcasts. If the concepts I share on this podcast resonate with you, or you're ready to change your relationships and mindset, I can help you. If you'd like in-depth, personalized support, I'd love to invite you to apply for my Life and Mindset coaching program. Just imagine you and I every week working together as I teach you the tools to up-level your life. To book your free 1-hour consultation call, go to www.stethoscopestoswaddles.com/consultation. You're doing a great job, Mama. Have a great week. Bye now.